In 1969, the entire world watched an American rocket carry 3 men to the moon. It was the greatest achievement in human history, the triumph of democracy, of freedom, of everything America stood for. But the man who built that rocket had once built weapons for Adolf Hitler, and the American government knew. His name was Wernher von Braun, and before he became the father of the American space program, he was SS Officer von Braun, a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party who used slave labor to build rockets that rained death on London. Thousands of prisoners died in his underground factories, worked to death, starved, hanged from cranes as a warning to others. And after the war, the United States didn't put him on trial. They gave him a job. This is the story of Operation Paperclip, the classified program that brought over 1,600 Nazi scientists to America, erased their war crimes from the record, and handed them the keys to the most powerful military and space technology on Earth. And the part that should disturb you is that it worked. April 1945. The war in Europe is ending. Allied forces are pushing deep into Germany, and they're finding something they didn't expect. Laboratories, research facilities, weapons programs decades ahead of anything in the West. The V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range ballistic missile, could strike targets over 200 miles away at speeds no defense system could stop. Jet engines, nerve agents, guided missiles, supersonic wind tunnels. Germany had been building the future while fighting a war it was losing. And now, 2 superpowers were racing to grab that future before the other one could. The Soviets were already moving. They had captured German laboratories in the East, relocated thousands of engineers and their families overnight in a single coordinated operation called Osoaviakim. America couldn't afford to fall behind. In July 1945, the Joint Chiefs of Staff authorized a secret program, originally called Operation Overcast. Its mission, recruit the best German scientists and bring them to the United States. But there was a problem, a big one. President Truman had signed an executive order, explicitly banning anyone with Nazi affiliations from entering the country, and nearly every scientist worth recruiting had been a Nazi. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, the JIOA, was put in charge of vetting the scientists. They were supposed to review each candidate's background, determine their level of involvement with the Nazi regime, and reject anyone who posed a security threat. Instead, they did the opposite. When a scientist's file showed Nazi Party membership, SS involvement, or direct connections to war crimes, the JIOA simply rewrote the file. They attached a paperclip to the new clean dossier, which is how the program got its name. Operation Paperclip. Records were falsified, backgrounds were invented. War criminals were repackaged as innocent researchers who had simply been caught up in the machinery of the Third Reich. And one by one, they boarded ships to America. The scale of this was staggering. Over 1,600 scientists, engineers, technicians, along with their families, relocated to military bases across the United States: Fort Bliss, Texas; White Sands, New Mexico; Huntsville, Alabama; Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. They were given homes, salaries, security clearances, and most importantly, they were given purpose. Wernher von Braun led the rocket program. His V-2 designs became the foundation of America's ballistic missile arsenal, and eventually, the Saturn V rocket that carried astronauts to the moon. But von Braun was just the beginning. Hubertus Strughold, the so-called father of space medicine, helped develop life support systems for astronauts. He had previously conducted experiments on prisoners at Dachau, testing how the human body reacted to extreme altitude and oxygen deprivation. Kurt Blome, a biological weapons expert, had been accused of experimenting with plague on concentration camp prisoners. Acquitted at Nuremberg, then quietly hired by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps. Arthur Rudolph, von Braun's deputy at the Mittelwerk underground factory, had directly managed production using slave labor from concentration camps. He later managed the Saturn V program at NASA. These weren't fringe figures. They were leaders of American science and defense, and their pasts were carefully, deliberately buried. Now, it would be easy to paint this as pure evil, but history is rarely that simple. The Cold War was escalating. The Soviet Union had its own nuclear weapons by 1949. The Korean War was raging. Intelligence reports suggested the Soviets were ahead in missile technology, partly because of their own captured German scientists. American military leaders argued that without Paperclip, the United States would lose the arms race, lose the space race, and potentially lose everything. General Leslie Groves, the man who ran the Manhattan Project, personally advocated for bringing German scientists to America. His argument was blunt. If we don't take them, the Soviets will, and they'll use them against us. And there was truth to that. The Soviets had already relocated over 2,200 German specialists in Operation Osoaviakim. They were building their missile program on the same German foundation. It was a race, and in a race, you don't stop to check the moral credentials of your engine. At least, that's what they told themselves. But not everyone agreed. In the State Department, officials pushed back hard. They argued that bringing Nazis to America, regardless of their scientific value, violated everything the country had just fought a war to defend. Albert Einstein, himself a refugee from Nazi Germany, wrote letters protesting the program. Investigative journalists in the 1970s and 80s began uncovering the truth. They found falsified records, exposed scientists with direct ties to concentration camps, revealed that the JIOA had deliberately circumvented presidential orders. In 1984, Arthur Rudolph was investigated by the Office of Special Investigations. Confronted with evidence of his role in the slave labor program at Mittelwerk, he agreed to leave the United States and renounce his citizenship rather than face trial. He had already received NASA's highest civilian honor. The man who managed slave laborers building rockets was given a medal by the American Space Agency before anyone thought to ask what he had done during the war. And here is what makes Operation Paperclip more than just a Cold War footnote. It forces a question that doesn't have a clean answer. Was it worth it? The Saturn V rocket, built by von Braun's team, remains the most powerful rocket ever successfully launched. The moon landing, one of humanity's defining moments, would not have happened on the same timeline without Paperclip scientists. American missile defense during the Cold War, jet aviation, space medicine, satellite technology, all of it accelerated by decades because of knowledge extracted from the Third Reich. One estimate valued the patents and industrial processes acquired through Paperclip at over $10 billion. But the cost wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the message it sent. That if you are useful enough, your crimes can be forgiven. That there is a price at which justice becomes negotiable. That the same hands that built weapons of genocide can be washed clean if they build weapons for the right side. The program was officially declassified in the 1990s. Today, the full scope of Operation Paperclip is documented in thousands of pages of government records. But the debate it sparked is far from settled. Every time a government makes a deal with someone, it shouldn't. Every time security is prioritized over accountability. Every time someone argues that the ends justify the means, they are standing on the foundation that Paperclip built. Wernher von Braun died in 1977, an American hero. His face had been on the cover of Time magazine. He had shaken hands with presidents. He had put men on the moon. But carved into the history he left behind is a question that America still doesn't like to answer. How much of the future was built on the crimes of the past? And who decided that was an acceptable trade? Subscribe, because the next one is even darker.